everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar. Happy New Year. It's 2025, January. We appreciate you joining us all today for the first webinar of the year. I'll just give it a little bit of time for folks to settle in and join the webinar. We have a good number of folks. Thank you all again for joining us, and welcome to the monthly webinar series. Because of the number of participants, your audio will be muted throughout the call, but you can always submit your questions or comments through the Q&A or the chat box. But please note that only comments related to the presentation will be addressed. Before we get started, we do want to acknowledge the Health Resources and Services Administration and funding source for the AIRP as noted in the chat box. Please do note that the entire webinar is being recorded and will be available on the AIRP website after this live presentation. Without further ado, I will pass it off to our speaker for today, Dr. Beck.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'm excited to speak to you today about mindfulness as a therapeutic approach for autistic people. Let's see here. Before we start, a lot of the work that I'll be sharing about a couple of different projects in this presentation, and so it has been funded by a few different grants at the local, state, and federal levels. And also unrelated to the projects I'll present, but related to the topic itself, I do have a private practice where I am a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher and teach mindfulness classes to community members in the Pittsburgh area. So to get us started, I thought we could start off today by reviewing a shared definition of mindfulness and why it might be a good fit for autistic people. Then I'll spend some time reviewing some of the evidence of mindfulness interventions that seem to be supportive and helpful for autistic people. And then I'll try to spend quite a bit of time at the end sharing some suggestions for how to use mindfulness with autistic people and some considerations for implementation, either in a research context or in a clinical context. Please feel free to use the chat throughout, and if I'm missing a bunch of comments in the chat, hopefully people will let me know. So what is mindfulness? I think if I would have given this presentation or the presentations I gave 10 years ago, the cultural definition of mindfulness might have been a little bit different. It's gotten very popular and mainstream, as do many things in our society when there's some evidence that they're helpful. So nowadays, if you bring up mindfulness to a client or to a family, many people have tried it or been exposed to it in some way at school or work or in a clinical setting, which in some ways is a big asset and in other ways is one of our greatest challenges when we think about how to use and introduce mindfulness with autistic people. So these are some of the mainstream. You see it's very popular in the news. We see schools trying to implement it. For years, I was being asked to consult with schools on how to integrate into schools. Some were successful, some were not. There's apps all over the place. Now there's technology where you can wear a device, and if you wear it, it will say whether or not you're meditating properly. So there's lots of things there's the device here. There's a lot, it's very popular, and also I think, so like I said, it can be confusing, but it also can be a benefit to using this therapeutic approach. So what is mindfulness? When I think about mindfulness, we can come back to one of the founding definitions of mindfulness within mental health research and physical health research, and that is from John Kabat-Zinn. There's 4 main parts to the definition. The first would be that mindfulness is really awareness. It's a state of being where someone is paying attention. That attention is very purposeful to be in the present moment. So the awareness that arises when you are paying attention to what's going on right in this exact moment without judgment to what you're reacting. So sometimes when I do mindfulness or I do any sort of education on mindfulness with kids or with clients, who make sure that they understand the 4 parts of the definition. This is kind of a nice figure that I think exemplifies what we think about when we think about mindfulness. Our body is present, and is your mind. How aware are we of what's going on in our body, our mind, and our feelings in any given moment? Which I'm sure is very hard on a Tuesday afternoon in a webinar where it's probably very attractive to be multitasking while listening to something. So meditation, one common misconception is that mindfulness and meditation is the same thing. It's actually 2 separate things. Meditation practices are ways that people can cultivate mindfulness or that awareness that I just spoke about. There are a lot of different meditation techniques, and that really varies by who the teacher is and how you might be exposed to it. Some of them are from religious traditions, some of them are taught very secular. But all of these meditation practices do have an aspect of focusing your attention and building your concentration. And so meditation practices can be really formal, like sitting down and breathing, but they also can be informal, like there's eating practices and coloring and some more interactive practices to learn and to cultivate mindfulness. So like I just said, mindfulness and meditation are not exactly the same thing. Mindfulness is the awareness of being present in any given moment, and meditations are a common way that you might learn to build your awareness. Meditation is not the only way to build awareness and be present in the moment. Exercise is a really good example of many people with like rigorous exercise can like be very present in the present moment. So some myths that I think are always worth bringing up, because you'll run into this, whether it is in a research context, if you're doing a project on mindfulness, or if you're using it in a clinical context. And I brought up this picture because you'll see in that little green bubble at the bottom left, positive thinking. So that's technically like a myth about mindfulness. Mindfulness isn't the same thing as positive thinking. It's really, truly is how to be present with whatever is happening right now in the moment. So it may or may not feel relaxing. It may or may not reduce stress. When we practice mindfulness, it may or may not feel pleasant or make you happier. Oftentimes, the way I would explain it or think about it is many of these things that you see on the screen, the relaxation, reduced stress, happiness is more of like a side effect of being present and having awareness in the moment. So I thought we would move into rather quickly into some core interventions and why it makes so much sense for autism. So when we look at mindfulness and all the evidence behind mindfulness, now there are a lot of papers and science behind mindfulness-based interventions. There's some core programs that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and then there's lots of individual programs for specific populations. But when we look at, I think it's useful to look at why does it work, or why are people benefiting from these therapeutic approaches. And what you see on the screen here are the commonly referenced and proven mechanisms of why mindfulness is improving outcomes for people. One of the main ones is that it improves our ability to regulate emotions. It engages our parasympathetic nervous system. We've actually seen many, many studies where it produces changes in the brain and the amygdala and other areas of the brain that engage in reactivity. Oops, sorry about that. So we've seen in many different studies across many different populations that the ability to improve emotion regulation. Another key aspect of mindfulness and why we think that this may be helpful for people is that it tends to increase awareness and attentional control, the ability to pay attention and control our reactions. Another one I think we're not as good at measuring, but there's some papers on it, and my clinical sense is this is a big one, is that it increases our ability to have self-compassion. There's a lot of good evidence on how it decreases rumination and avoidance. And then, of course, there's a physiological aspect to mindfulness and breathing practices in general. So if we think about that with autism, we think about that there's a lot of work showing that autistic people are at higher risk and they have higher severity of emotion dysregulation. So the fact that mindfulness has a very strong evidence for improving this, that's a good mechanistic fit to consider when we're thinking about how to help autistic people. Increasing awareness, we know that challenges with awareness are common in autism. Of course, it's not, it's a very heterogeneous population, so it's not everyone, but alexithymia and interoception are challenging things for some autistic people. And mindfulness interventions really do work on how to notice things in the body, how to notice thoughts, how to notice emotions. So that awareness piece seems to be a good fit for this as well. Increasing self-compassion, I think really with any group of people that are marginalized, including people with disabilities and autistic people, you'll see lower self-esteem, lower self-compassion. So this is also something that I think makes it a good fit. Rumination is an avoidance is common in autism too. It may or may not be related to an autistic trait, but some people are thinking that way. And there's some really strong studies out there by colleagues who have actually done mindfulness-based intervention clinical trials to decrease rumination among autistic people, and that science is very strong. And then the physiological, I think hyperarousal and sensory sensitivities is common in a lot of autistic people. So this physiology of how to calm the body is something that might be a good fit for autistic people. And then, you know, the thing that I think about the most as a mindfulness clinician who often works with autistic people is this part. So we think it's a good mechanistic fit for this population. Maybe not for everyone, but the thing that I think is most exciting is that it's an intervention that's very easily tailored to different needs. So it's not reliant on cognitive strategies like something like cognitive behavior therapy. It's easily individualized for different people. And we have some good evidence and good work in even our group that it's very feasible and acceptable to do it with those who have limited speaking ability, those with intellectual disability, and you know, individuals with co-occurring ADHD, things like that. So it's a very flexible approach, which I think makes it a nice thing for this population or this group of people. I won't spend too much time on this slide here, but when we think about mindfulness interventions, I'm not saying that they're better or worse than other approaches. They're different. So they're very different from a behavioral approach where you might look at the antecedent or the consequence before something occurred, or cognitive behavioral therapy where we're thinking about cognitive strategies or how to rework thoughts in relation to something that's occurring. Mindfulness really is about training someone to be able to notice what's going on right now in this moment. We're not going to make a judgment or try to change what's going on in this moment, but we want to like notice what's going on and then choose a tool that would be supportive. So we really don't have any of that like changing thoughts or focusing at all on antecedent or consequences. So it's a very different approach than some of the other programs that autistic families will have encountered. In terms of evidence, I would say there's a lot of emerging evidence as an evidence-based practice to have this approach. And there's some really cool clinical trials that are going on right now. So my work really focuses more on teens and adults. So this is not an exhaustive list at all. And if you want an exhaustive list, there's quite a few really great reviews and the citations on this slide that you can pull up. I think many of them are freely available to read about every single mindfulness intervention that's been tested in autism. But mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is like one of the gold standards in terms of mindfulness treatments overall, has been tested quite a bit in autism with some strong evidence behind it. Something I'm excited about that I think is emerging and there's more work going on is dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, as a possible supportive approach for autistic people. I'll talk some about our EASE program, which is a mindfulness program for teens and young adults with and without intellectual disability. And then in children or youth, My Mind has a really good parent and child intervention where they take the program together, and there's a lot of good, strong evidence for it. So mindfulness-based stress reduction, this is the program that I teach in private practice to the general community, but it's a pretty intensive program. It's 8 weeks. It's 2.5 to 3 hours every week. There's 1 full day of silent meditation after week 6. People are asked to practice mindfulness 45 minutes a day. Oftentimes they're formal meditation practices, and there's a set number of meditations. Why I like this program is that this program exists all over the world in many hospital systems. It's a program that's available, and we have some good science across our field that's shown that this is a feasible and acceptable program for autistic people, it's one service option. And oftentimes people take an MBSR program at the same time as doing individual therapy, so it can augment things to support people. One of the studies I ran earlier in my career, I studied whether you would need to adapt MBSR for an autistic person, or if it was feasible and acceptable to just take the program as it is. And I found that really adaptation wasn't needed in that particular study, which I think is a good thing. There have been several studies, randomized controlled trials of colleagues, where they showed that mindfulness-based stress reduction improved rumination and negative thinking among autistic adults with some neuroimaging. And there was a really exciting study that tested MBSR against cognitive behavior therapy to see if they were equivalent, and the outcomes were equivalent, meaning both of them were helpful. So some promising things there. Dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, is an exciting area of research right now in autism, in my opinion, because I think it could be a really good option for autistic people that have suicidality and self-injury, which there's more attention now in our science that there's high risk for suicidality and self-harm in autistic people. So there have been quite a few studies that are cited on this slide, if you're interested to look at it, that showed that DBT was feasible and acceptable, with some evidence showing that it might help emotion regulation. And there's a couple big clinical trials going on worldwide that are looking at how this might improve suicidal thoughts and self-harm. So that's something to keep your eye on. The EASE program is called the Emotion Awareness and Skills Enhancement Program. That's a program that myself and my colleagues, in the pictures on the right, you'll see there, Dr. Susan White, Dr. Caitlin Connor, and Dr. Carla Mazevsky, we co-developed it together. It's an individual therapy program designed as outpatient therapy to be billed as insurance in like a mental health clinic. It ranges from 16 to 20 weeks long, 1 session per week. We were forced to to test this virtually during the pandemic, but really we kind of encourage this to be a in-person therapeutic approach. And we have tested it in autistic people ages 12 to 25 with and without co-occurring intellectual disability, with and without people who had limited speaking ability. So how we developed the program, we drafted it ourselves. We had members of the autistic community review our program. We ran a study across Pittsburgh and at the time Virginia Tech to test it. We ran a large randomized controlled trial again between Pittsburgh and Alabama. Something I'm very proud of and excited about is we ran a study where we adapted our program for individuals with high supports needs and intellectual disability. We've ran a couple other studies on it, and now it exists as one big treatment, which we're testing in a large comparative effectiveness trial. So our program is primarily a mindfulness-based intervention. It is designed to work on that mechanism I spoke about earlier of emotion regulation. So we're trying to help autistic teens and adults improve emotion regulation skills so that they can meet their goals. And as I mentioned, we developed this in partnership with autistic community members. There's 2 steps in the EASE program, and it builds over the program. The first is really we work with clients to improve their awareness of emotions and really learn. We're trying to suspend judgment of negative emotions. Oops. And then we teach a series of tools. There's quite a few that we teach where the client can choose tools that are helpful for them, and maybe not all of them are things that they want to use, but we teach a series of mindfulness tools. So we really work hard on building awareness of sensations in the body, which can then help clients learn when emotions are changing. So that's something we work on for many, many, many weeks. And we use meditation practices and other types of mindfulness practices to do that. We teach a series of mindfulness meditation practices. They are drawn from mindfulness meditation. They're taught secular and they're very physical body focused. I'll get to later how we make sure we have autism affirming practices when we use when we lead the meditations. We incorporate sensory needs into the EASE program. So we actually do kind of a fusion of sensory needs with mindfulness awareness, which is a cool part of the program. And we work with clients to find ways to change their focus when they feel like their emotions are really strong. And then we work a very tiny bit with thoughts, but more about how to be less attached to your thoughts than how to change your thoughts. So it's slightly different from a cognitive behavioral therapy approach. As I mentioned, you can use this QR code or look at our website. There's an ongoing trial comparing the EASE program with the Unified Protocol with almost 500 families by the end of the research study. Okay, so it looks like I'm right on time here. I wanted to shift most of today's webinar about the biggest challenge of using mindfulness, in my opinion, and that is how to implement it. And really, you'll probably hear me say this a few times this afternoon. This is not just an autism thing. This is a big challenge with mindfulness overall. How do we take a mindfulness program, and expand it so it reaches more people? Many mindfulness programs require a ton of training and a lot of personal experience meditating. And that takes a long time for people to learn, and it's an expensive training process a lot of the time. The one training pathway I went down for mindfulness-based stress reduction took me longer than my PhD did. So it's something I always try to think about when we're suggesting that people consider mindfulness in our field. So I thought it could be helpful to just talk about some common challenges and mistakes that we've seen over the years, and maybe that we have some videos and could get a discussion going. First and foremost, I think the thing that is good to keep in mind when you're considering using mindfulness with a family or an adult is that this is not something that you would just kind of sprinkle in and use with someone on and off, not consistently. We've seen that people do a lot better if we use meditation or a focus on mindful awareness really central to something they're doing in therapy or in a program. We found that it really requires very routine integration into their life. It's best if families are involved, if they're in school, school supports are there too. One of the most common problems I see is that you'll often see people will introduce mindfulness or breathing in a moment of crisis. And that can be really invalidating and can really not be very helpful in the moment. I think it's highly dependent on how well a clinician or a parent or a family member models mindfulness. And again, I said this earlier, it's easily tailored to different sensory, communication, and cognitive needs. So when we think about mindfulness, just generally, there's a couple core pillars. This is not all of them, but these are really important pillars that we think about. So when we do anything with mindfulness, we're very focused on the present. We're very focused on practicing. It's very experiential. And we're very focused on how to try to stay neutral and not judge things that are occurring. That's why it makes it such a good fit for pain, chronic pain. So when we think about some autism considerations for this, when we think about present focus, I like to remind clinicians and families that we want to encourage awareness in the present, but that really builds over time, over a long period of time. So families will come in expecting to get better at it or see change immediately, but this is something that takes months and months of work and practice with it. It's best learned with repetition, integrating into routines, and the best way to do that is to make sure you work so that it's very individualized to specific sensory needs. This non-judgment, sometimes I do work with families where mindfulness is not a good fit, whether what's going on in the school or what's going on home. If the current things that are working for that family are very consequence driven or behavioral driven, this mindfulness approach is going to be very different. It's going to be maybe too big of a shift at that time for them. So we don't really focus on in mindfulness why something's happening. We focus on like what's happening right now and what's a choice you have. So I thought this could be a cool way to use the chat. I see we have almost 60 people here, which is awesome. But when we think about meditation, you just take a moment and pause and think about it. What comes to mind of what meditation looks like? What do you see? If you think about yourself meditating or another person meditating, what do you see? Someone sitting on the floor or what? And if you're willing, just take a moment and everyone type it in the chat so we can see what people expect meditation to look like. Quiet space, breathing, visualizing, closed eyes, breath work. Closed eyes sitting, noticing surroundings. Lots of breathing. Well, I like using the mantra. That's a good one. Relaxed. Yeah. Grounding. Oh, that's a nice one. Sitting outside in the sun. It's -8 degrees where I'm at. So I like that one, Denise. Observing. Yeah, it is hard to Katie's. So it seems like we're all kind of expecting like quiet space, breathing, lots of different comments on what the experience of practicing mindfulness is and meditation. Keep them coming. I'm going to show some artwork that actually one of our autistic colleagues made. This is something I like to show both families and clinicians about expectations about mindfulness, especially in when we're thinking about with autistic people. It may not always look like sitting still, eyes closed, breathing, which we see in the chat. Lots of people are saying things other than just that. It might be like I've worked with some children with mindfulness, some autistic children, where the whole time they colored and meditated at the same time. Other folks who were kind of like this picture here, he was laying upside down on the couch meditating the whole time while using a sensory tool, using sensory tools while practicing meditation. So I just like to challenge clinicians new to using mindfulness and new to using in this area that it might not look like a very calm and still practice, but someone very much might still be meditating and practicing mindfulness. And we really need to be flexible about what the practices look like. So thank you for participating in the chat here. I'm going to actually show a video of a walking practice, a walking mindfulness practice that is with an autistic person. And I thought afterwards we could talk about it in the chat some. But this is just to show an example how you can be really flexible with mindfulness practice. It doesn't always have to be breathing, because you will see people that come in and say, I don't want to do the breathing practice. So I'm going to skip ahead to here. Are willing is that we could practice this way to change focus while moving with a walking practice, and then maybe we go outside.
Sure.
It's nice out.
That actually sounds really nice.
Okay, so we're gonna head out now and then we can go practice.
Okay.
So we can use walking and moving our bodies as a way to change our focus when emotions are too strong.
Okay.
So let's pause here for a second. I want to show you something.
Okay.
Gonna put your feet a little further apart, just like that, and rock back and forth on your feet. And try to notice, what do you feel in your feet?
I notice my socks and my shoes on my feet.
Yeah?
I notice the balls of my feet moving. I notice the leaves crunching every time I do it.
Yeah, me too. I notice one of my feet feels like it's squishing in my shoe differently than the other.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, cool. So why we're stopping and doing this rocking is because sometimes you can't always walk away.
Yeah.
Like if you're in school and you need to stay where you are, your emotions feel really strong, then this is one thing that we can do, either sitting in our chair or standing, okay? And we'll practice it a little bit more walking. So
All right,
we'll
let's do
start
it.
walking kind of slowly here. And what do you notice in your feet? We want to keep our focus on our feet.
I notice the leaves crunching more.
Yeah.
I hear birds chirping over there. I notice the soft grass, how kind of squishy it is.
Yeah.
I notice the different colors of leaves through the different kinds of trees. All that good stuff.
That's a cool thing to notice. There are different trees here. So let's pause again.
Okay.
Do you remember what to do?
Yep.
What do we do?
Back and forth
Back and forth.
with your feet.
Yep. Feeling things in your feet. What are you feeling now?
I feel the different sounds. I hear different sounds,
Yeah.
and I feel how warm the grass is.
Yeah. That's cool. I didn't notice that until you said it. And so we'll keep walking to practice this in our session for how to change focus.
That sounds great.
Do you want to turn around or do you want to walk this way more?
Let's walk more.
Okay. So as we're walking, we'll keep practicing. What do you notice?
I notice the crunching the leaves still, and I notice how cool that tree looks over there.
One key.
Okay, so I'm going to ask those who are here to put in the chat something they noticed that the client did in that example of the walking practice. Anything that stood out to you at all about him learning this new mindful walking practice? They seemed engaged. Cecilia, yeah, noticing a lot about his surroundings, very observant. Yeah, thanks, Alexis. Bringing the attention back to the feet. So you notice I'm talking about other things in the environment and then just gently bringing it back to the feet. Yeah, using his senses to be present. Continue to opt into the practice. Yeah. And then, yeah, I used his five senses, descriptive of his surroundings. So when we go back to when we talked about that, what is mindfulness? It's awareness in the present moment, purposeful, and that's what we were doing there. So we didn't have to sit this client maybe wasn't a good fit for sitting still and breathing all the time, but this movement and learning to notice things and then come back and improve his attention and concentration on his feet was a really good skill for him. Being outside in nature was good. So one little clinical anecdote is I really do truly believe that a movement-based practice like yoga or walking is very helpful for when someone has more extreme emotional reactions. So like sitting and breathing when we're really, really upset is not always a great option. It's harder to calm if that's the reason why you're practicing it with them. So I always make sure to kind of do movement-based practices first when working with someone. And maybe if we have time, just like a comment or two on something you notice a therapist doing when trying to teach them this new mindful walking practice. If you could put that in the chat, something you noticed that the therapist did. Giving choices, affirming responses, choice. Very much practicing together, modeling. I saw it a lot in there. Compliments, encouragement, yeah. Great observations, and we'll get to this in a second, but I think one of the things I see that sort of challenges that come up the most is too often therapists are correcting with mindfulness on what to notice, and then that does kind of, it goes against what we really want in mindfulness, which is to notice everything. And also it can discourage someone, especially when, notice things in the body might be hard for that particular person. So great activity in the chat here. Some more autism specific considerations. If you are familiar with mindfulness and you do a lot of meditation practices, some meditation practices use a lot of metaphors, imagery, and poems. I tend to keep those out when I lead meditations in this population, and I try very hard to be very clear and specific with body sensations. That's something that we're trying to improve awareness of, and also I'll maybe hand out poems or metaphors separate to someone if that's something that they really like. Modeling is like the biggest thing, and I saw it all in the chat. So that is really what I can't stress enough, is it really needs to be modeled. by a therapist, and then also by folks in their life in other settings like home and school. I want to try to avoid any sort of phrasing that makes it seem like one way is the right way to practice, because that can make someone frustrated when, maybe sitting still isn't right for them, or breathing a certain way. We want to try to make it really open to whatever comes up in a meditation or mindfulness practice. Again, challenge your own expectations about what it looks like to be engaged. I mentioned already examples of where I have only walked with clients for weeks on end when learning mindfulness. I've also colored at the same time. So I really want to kind of get kind of fun and creative of how to think about our goal to be present with what's here now and what are supportive things that will help do that. Tailoring to needs, depending on who you're working with. So if I work with folks who have limited speech, I will reduce the number of words, and I'll repeat the same words over and over more. And I'll also try to do more physical modeling. If it's like we're teaching breathing, and make sure it's like really clear what's happening. Almost all of my clients don't prefer to remain still. So I always teach movement-based practices first and then integrate sensory tools within it. Something I didn't know when I was earlier in my career, and I think it was a mistake that I try to make sure I tell everyone, is that I think I made an assumption earlier in my career that someone with trouble with attention or ADHD needs shorter practices because it's hard to do that concentration. And I have really systematically found over the years that I start with longer practices first. So much longer than 1 or 2 minutes. 1 or 2 minutes is not long enough for attention to focus, and especially someone that has difficulty with that. So that's something that I learned over the years. And movement can really help when someone has trouble with attention. You'll see movement in most of these because movement can be really helpful, and I think sometimes we forget about it. When we think about when to incorporate it into whatever you're doing, we always want to think about what's the intention of teaching mindfulness? When are you introducing it? I think the biggest thing is not to introduce it to someone in a crisis, because it's going to get frustrating quickly that it didn't work, quote unquote, and then they may not use it. And then what other approaches are you using? This goes back to that slide you saw about behavioral approaches or other ones you might want to combine with something so open and accepting as a mindfulness approach. So when I mentioned that EASE program, we did lots and lots of clinical trials over hundreds of families and therapists, and we have recorded the challenges that have come up. So I thought I would just take a moment to share some of the big challenges. And there's a paper, we can put it in the drive so you could read it if you're interested in it. But this is essentially what the paper talks about. So the most common client challenges that come up with autistic clients are attention and focus, having trouble, sitting still with attention, not noticing things in the body. Say, what did you notice? So most of the time I'll say, I'm not sure. I have worked with folks who they feel too much. So their sensory, the hypersensitivity to things, they'll feel too many things during a mindfulness awareness practice, and then we have to work on how to focus it. You'll hear a lot, it's not working when they're trying it, when they're already really upset. And I think a lot of people think they have to sit still and do it a certain way. And I thought it was worth mentioning that in the last 10 years of teaching MBSR program to lots of neurotypical adults, these are also the same challenges that I see with neurotypical clients that come to a meditation program. So there's nothing, that this is kind of expected. These challenges that come up, I think sometimes they make families and clinicians nervous, but this is part of learning mindfulness. And so there are ways to work with people around it. When people say it's not working, we want to be really open and model that non-judgment. This is an expectation that someone wants to get better really quickly. And, you know, somehow how I would respond to that is like, well, that's great that you were noticing that you expected to feel good while you were doing that and you didn't. What did you notice instead? And have them tell you something specific. Sleeping, that doesn't come up that much for me with younger clients. It's more like sleep deprived adults that it comes up, but basically the only solution is to like sit up. I mentioned attention. If someone's really distressed about attention, to start with longer practices, and I really encourage movement. Really, it can help. When someone doesn't know, they have that I don't know internal awareness. That's okay. I tend to just encourage that response of I don't know, and then I share things that I noticed, and I'll make sure that I change up what I notice every time I work with someone. I'm gonna play a short video on this because this is one of the most common things that I see in autism is this I don't know awareness response. I'm going to jump ahead just so we have time for questions at the end, but you'll see I'll be leading a breathing practice. This is someone with high support needs and intellectual disability.
Okay, yeah. So breathing in and breathing out. Noticing the air entering your body and exiting your body. Still breathing in and breathing out. And you don't have to breathe in a special way. We're just noticing our normal breathing, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. We will do it a couple more times. Breathing in and breathing out. Noticing breathing in this moment. When you're ready, we'll stop that practice and good job. We're going to talk about what we noticed.
Okay.
Did you notice anything during that practice?
No,
Nothing?
nothing.
I noticed my breathing like right here, I think. And I noticed my hands were feeling like a little sweaty.
Okay.
Yeah. How did your body feel?
My hands seem normally pretty fine.
They feel pretty fine?
Yeah.
Great job. You did a really good job in that practice.
Thanks.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
So we're going to
Okay, so same thing we did before, put in the chat. What's something you notice about this client, JJ? What did he, anything you noticed when he was doing the practice, and then what he said afterwards? Key things that stood out to you. He was trying to follow the direction of the practice. It did look like he was trying pretty hard. Yeah, Alexis. He was involved. You might have noticed he was looking at me the whole time, right? Yeah, so his initial response was, I don't know. And so typically he was focused on what we're asking them to do, right, Lisa? So when he said, I don't know, you know, a common pitfall we'll see is like someone will keep questioning, like, well, what did you feel in the body? What did you feel here? And they'll ask a lot of follow-up questions when someone says, I don't know. A really strong suggestion is to not go that route and to go the route of giving examples of something you noticed. So I tried to give 2 examples of something about the breathing because that's what we were doing, and then something a little bit easier to notice, like my hands. If you were in a setting where there was a really clear sound, I often start with that, say, oh, I noticed the sound. And yeah, Ellie, that's a good question. Was he looking for the right answer? you'll see that a lot in mindfulness, or someone's trying to figure out what the right answer is after a practice if they don't notice something. And so that's why I really strongly suggest that you model different things that you notice after a practice. And we practice 3 or 4 times in 145 minutes. So that's a lot of opportunity for me to show a lot of things that they might have noticed. So there's no right answer. And over time, we do see that awareness will build. Okay. Some suggestions for common client challenges. I mentioned we want to encourage when someone says they don't like it. Like some clinicians and families panic. And I'll, usually say something like, "Oh, great job not noticing. You're noticing you didn't want to do that. Like, where did you feel that in your body? Or how did you know you didn't want to do that?" When someone has too much sensory input, we try to find a safe, neutral anchor in the body so that it can help them. Again, being curious and flexible. Can't say it enough to be really flexible with how you lead a practice. I already mentioned this already. The most common clinician error, I think, is after you do a meditation or a mindfulness practice to over question someone. So when they say, "I don't know," and you just keep asking them questions, and it's always well-intended, they're asking too many questions, and it will sort of discourage the person and also make it seem like they're wrong. So leading without personal practice is something you really need to practice. Sorry, my daughter is downstairs on a microphone. So it's distracting me. But anyways, leading without personal practice is a common clinician problem. You can't really ask someone else to meditate if you've never done it before, because you won't understand it, or understand that all these common things that are challenging are common and you'll experiencing them too. A common challenge that I did earlier in my career is I made my meditations way too short. So those are just some things. We already saw a video on overprocessing. Modeling is really the key here. There will be notes in the drive for this. Leading without personal practice. Use a recording. There's lots of recordings out there, and there's some, like our team has a bunch of recordings that are designed for autistic people. And so reach out to your colleagues and do your homework on which recordings to maybe use. Meditations are too short. I think you want to give people enough time for their attention to settle, and you want to give enough time for their attention to get distracted so that they have an opportunity to bring it back. If you ever feel like you're trying to convince someone about what mindfulness means or why to do it, then you're doing too much explaining. Mindfulness is learned by practicing it. And so if you're doing the explaining, then you want to just kind of stop what you're doing and do a practice together. And then I'm going to end on don't introduce mindfulness practice in crisis. People need to learn this over time so that it's a skill they can use when you're upset and in crisis. The only things that are going to be accessible to you are ones that you have been practicing and have really developed. So with that, I thank you for your attention and your awesome participation in the chat. And if there's any questions, we have a couple minutes left here to talk about things.
Thank you, Dr. Beck. That was a really great presentation, and I think a lot of the folks in the chat who were engaged, thank you again. And the recording will be put online as well as the slides after today. I did see a few questions in the Q&A.
Oh, I think I only had chat open. Let me open that. Sorry. Oh, I see. Do you want me to read? Okay. So Alexis, how to access mindfulness skills during a stressful event. Example, a child with autism and ADHD is put on an opposite team for if any knows. The counselor won't accommodate a request to be on the same team. Oh, that's a shame. The autistic child becomes frustrated, physically aggressive, throwing things. How to intervene, encourage mindfulness skills before trips. Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have the answer there, Alexis. What comes up for me, first of all, is that is such a shame that the counselor won't accommodate the request. But if we go beyond that, I think it's really helpful if you work with autistic children and families, as people in general. You want to try to learn this when you're at home and you're calm and it becomes a skill. And then what I do is I work with families on like scaling up crisis. So I'll actually we'll kind of like facilitate a stressful game where, maybe the child doesn't like to lose. We'll purposely have them lose. And then that gives an opportunity to try a mindfulness skill or the skill I have there with me. And then over time, we get up to more extreme things. But, in this case with the camp, Alexis, you might not have had time to do that and have done all that pre-work. My go-to thing when things get really out dysregulated is you need movement. And I try to do walking, and I don't even make it like a fancy mindfulness practice. We try to walk away, and as we're walking, we notice sensations in the feet, like you saw in that video, because there's some good science behind grounding in feet when emotions are really high. Have there been any participatory research studies on the use of mindfulness in clients? That's a good question. I think we've used participatory methods in some of the studies that I've read and some of the ones that I've done, but I'm not sure there's differences in participatory methods. And I never read a CBPR study, but more of just a participatory project. But I could send you that paper, Ellie, if you reach out to me. Let's see, we have time for a couple more. Does your practice collaborate with professionals from other fields? I'm a BCBA doc student, very interested. Thank you for this work. Yeah, we do. I would encourage you to reach out to our website or email me. We do a lot of trainings on neuroaffirming strategies. Some just on neuroaffirming strategies and some that incorporate mindfulness too. And do you have any strategies for community agencies? Yeah, so that's a good question, Robin. I think that's a challenge. A lot of community agencies don't have mindfulness expertise, but we do have, my biggest suggestion is to have these community providers start practicing meditation, some themselves, and it's going to be a lot easier to develop expertise if you start practicing it yourself. And then we do have some handouts and strategies and suggestions for community agencies that want to help autistic people in this way. Great question that just came up. What's the difference between internal and external awareness? I usually work, we do want internal awareness because we want to know sensations in the body, emotions, thoughts to be able to make choices. So there's that. But I have found that if someone does not have a lot of internal awareness, starting external and then working to internal awareness is a good way to go about it. So starting external with colors and sounds and sensory tools, and then I'll combine sensory tools with breathing. So we're doing both. And eventually we can build to internal awareness. Are there some way to practice mindfulness with others in a group as a non-clinician? Yeah, there's lots of groups to learn this and collaborate with each other. So if people are interested in what sessions that we have, please reach out specifically, and I can give you some of these more direct resources for all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Beck. That takes us to time. Really appreciate your presentation and the work you're doing in this area. If you want to put your email in the chat, because you've mentioned it a few times, so that folks can copy that before we sign off for today. Thank you all again for joining us. Reach out to Dr. Beck if you have more questions, and I will also put in the chat a link to where you can find the archive, the recording of today's session, as well as the PowerPoint, which will be in the link of the description to end the video. And then we hope to see you at the next webinar in February as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you,
I just
everyone.
write down that. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.